How you doing?
Hey, how you doing?
Hi, hello.
Good.
Hello.
So, my name is Gabby, and I want to say thank you to everyone so much for coming and for being with us today. And we're gonna start the program. Please feel welcome to eat as much food as you can and enjoy each other and enjoy the beautiful weather. And let's see how we can do this in a good way. Do people want to maybe sit on the grass mostly in this area over here? And
Stand up here so we can see you up on the top step.
I mean, if people can do that, all right, whatever, that's great. And, okay, so if anybody feels inspired and wants to take a seat and make themselves comfortable and hang out, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Her name is Bartlett, and she's going to speak about Palestine and what's going on. To give a basic idea of some of the vision for today, we're gathered here marking the 5-year anniversary of the shooting of our dear and wonderful friend Tristan Anderson. Maybe we can give Tristan a hand for coming out here and still going to protest and still being a badass. And you know, it's a difficult day for us. We're never really quite sure what the fuck to do on the anniversary. But maybe we can come and be together and be a community here at the plaza. And, you know, and also to understand that our story, that Tristan's story, is a story that's happening all over the world. And that we got to try to be together and be on the same side as the people. Particularly when it's our government that's perpetrating such horrendous abuse all over the world. So yeah, please go ahead and make yourselves comfortable and hang out. One other thing, we're going to march at about 6:30 or so, and I think that'll be cool and it'll be nice. Get out in the streets a little bit. We know how to do these things. And but before the march, we're going to have a couple of speakers. One vision for today was to try to get away from some of that standard rally format of lots of speakers, everybody gets 2 minutes, hypes up the crowd, move on to the next speaker to have their 2 minutes to hype up the crowd. We want to really try to get into some of the depth of the issues and really talk about Palestine and talk about Teargas and talk about U.S. military aid as it's going all over the world in all the wrong ways and all. And so to try to really get into some of the meat of the issues. And then march. All right. So let's maybe give a round of applause for Eva Bartlett, a very accomplished activist who's been in Palestine for a long time and is going to talk to us about Palestine.
Oh wow, I got some support from the dog too. So thank you for your lovely applause. I'm right now on a speaking tour to bring awareness to the issues of what is going on in Gaza. And so I'm very glad to be here. I usually do show photos. Obviously I'm not doing that here, but I'm going to try to give you as much information on the current situation and also the systematic policies that the Israeli authorities are imposing on the Palestinians of Gaza and how this is causing further and further decimation of their economy and their means of existence. So basically, just a little bit about myself. I went to Gaza in November 2008. I was on one of the Free Gaza boats which sailed from Cyprus to Gaza, and yes, it was a great initiative. They sailed 5 times, and any boat thereafter was violently attacked by the Israeli Navy, including 2 years later, there was a Freedom Flotilla, which included 6 vessels, one of which was the Mavi Marmara, and roughly 600 people or more on those vessels. And the Israeli army attacked both by sea with elite commandos in Zodiacs and in their gunships, and also by airdropping elite commandos onto the boats, firing. 9 people were killed, including 1 U.S. citizen. So that's kind of the evolution of the boat movement, and the whole purpose of it was to at least symbolically break the siege on Gaza. So what is the siege? Well, Amira Haas, who's a great Israeli journalist who writes for Haaretz, would say that, in fact, the Israeli authorities have been closing down Gaza, closing the borders and choking the people of Gaza even since the 90s. But but at least since 2006, after Hamas was democratically elected, the West cut ties with Gaza. They cut aid, they cut any sort of discourse or dialogue with Gaza, and Israel basically performed a lockdown on the borders because, of course, Israel controls Gaza's borders, with the exception of Rafah, which is controlled by Egypt. So basically, the lockdown meant no exports, very limited imports, and of course, the attacks on the farmers and the fishers, the violation of Gaza's airspace with war machines like F-16s and drones. So basically, I'm going to get into the siege, but I want to start by talking about the attacks on the farmers and fishers, because this is all interconnected. The Israeli authorities are imposing and have been imposing for a decade a so-called buffer zone or a restricted access area. They say it is 300 meters on the Gaza side from the border, but in fact, they attack Palestinians as far as 2 kilometers from the border by means of machine gunning and shelling. But even if it were merely the 300 meters, it annexes 1/3 of Palestinian farmland. And this is critical because Gaza is a very small space. It's only 40 kilometers long. It's only 12 kilometers wide at its widest point, but the long, narrow strip is just about 5.5, 6 kilometers. And there's 1.7 billion people piled into that very small space. Then when you consider that 1/3 of the farmland is no longer accessible, this is really critical in terms of food security, in terms of people's own ability to provide employment for their families. And then, of course, as I said, it actually extends beyond 300 meters. So the Israeli army imposes this unilaterally imposed buffer zone on the Palestinians by various means, including, as I said, machine gunning and shelling. They have remote-controlled towers all along the border, which open kind of like a lotus flower, and there's a gun inside that swivels and can target with precision. The soldiers are in a booth miles away using a joystick and kind of very removed from the situation, certainly removed from the humanity and suffering of Palestinians, and firing with precision on men, women, children, and elderly. So as an activist with ISM in Gaza, we accompanied the farmers to try to enable them to be on their land for whatever reason, whether it was to plant or to harvest or simply to be on their land. And on many occasions, when we're on land, at least 500 meters or more from the border, we come under intense gunfire. So of course, this is a daily reality for Palestinians. And over 170 Palestinians have been killed in the border region in the last decade, not to mention hundreds more injured by the Israeli attacks. When internationals are with them, they do fire upon us, but they don't always injure internationals. They're a little bit more careful after having injured so many dedicated activists, including Tristan, of course. Nice to meet you, Tristan. But that said, they still do try to harass internationals and terrorize them to the point where, they're hoping that we won't accompany the farmers, and then they can get on with their brutal policy of maiming and murdering Palestinian farmers. But as activists, we would stay with the farmers, and when the shooting began, we would remain there. And in some instances, they would shoot for a period of minutes and stop. In other instances, they would shoot for half an hour, 40 minutes, the bullets whizzing past us. In one particular case, a farmer we were with was actually shot. We made the mistake of being too far ahead of him, and they just shot around us. So all this goes on a nearly daily basis. Defense for Children, excuse me, dry throat. That's better.
Want some water?
Yes, please. It's well documented by Defense for Children International, B'Tselem.
Sorry. They're getting water for you.
I'm dying here. Palestinian Center for Human Rights. And these are, thank you very much. Breaking the flow. These are part of the policies of not only attacking Palestinians, but rendering the land, sorry, I'm getting a cold or something, rendering the land uninhabited, and it's very fertile land, by the way. It was the breadbasket of Gaza, and now it's largely inaccessible. And not only that, but they're doing the same thing to the fishers, again, by brutal means of heavy-duty machine gun fire on the fishers, who, under the Oslo Accords, have the right to access 20 miles off the coast, but due to the Israeli policies, are now only limited to 3 miles off the coast. So this is 15% of their water. There are very few fish there. The fishers have beyond 7 miles. So obviously the fishers are no longer able to eke a living as they used to, and they're no longer able to provide the fish on the markets as they used to. So this is then impacting impacting on the society as a whole because the fish no longer exist. In terms of poverty in Gaza, it's manufactured poverty. 80% of the population depends on food aid for their survival. The food aid is roughly just flour, sugar, oil. It is not produce, it is not nutritious, healthy food. So there's now an increase in diabetes and other food-related diseases like malnourishment and anemia. And again, this is preventable if Palestinians were able to farm and fish as they used to, and if the borders were open, because this is another element of the siege, is that exports have been banned for the last 7 years. So this is critically maiming the society. They used to export strawberries and citrus and furniture and clothing, etc., to nearby Arab markets and even to North American markets and European markets, and now they're exporting absolutely nothing. So this is obviously crippling the economy. And then on top of that, of course, you have the random wars Israel wages on Gaza, in which they not only murder people through various nefarious means, but they also intentionally destroy infrastructure, intentionally destroy schools and hospitals, and intentionally destroy businesses and farms. So again, this is adding to not only the collective misery, but the collective impoverishment. I was in Gaza when it was being attacked in December 2008 and 9, January 2009. And just, I'm sure you're all aware of the scenario of the attack, that prior to the attacks, the Israeli authorities closed the Erez crossing. We're not allowing foreign journalists in, and we're maintaining this narrative that they were mainly merely targeting Hamas terrorists, and I say terrorists between quotation marks. But in fact, the few of us that were in Gaza were trying very hard to combat that narrative, because what they were in fact doing was bombing everything feasibly possible to bomb, including mosques and schools and nurseries and marketplaces, etc. And I always do make a point of mentioning that Gaza doesn't have any bomb shelters. They don't have an iron dome defense system, and the people were locked within the borders of Gaza, not able to flee as they were being bombed every area of the strip. We volunteered with the Palestinian medics for two reasons. One, the Israeli army traditionally kills and kidnaps medics. In the case of Gaza, they just go for killing or maiming. And two medics had already been killed by that point. And the other reason being, of course, we wanted to be able to document the worst of the war crimes, and we did. By the end of it, we documented the use of white phosphorus repeatedly all over Gaza. And I think it's really important to stress, I know you're an educated crowd, but white phosphorus is a chemical weapon. And nobody has held Israel accountable for using chemical weapons.
That's right.
Depleted uranium, flechette bombs, dime. All of these were used on the civilians of Gaza. A medic I worked with one night was dead the next day when his ambulance, where he was standing at the end, was shelled with a dart bomb. His body was shredded and he went into shock and died. By the end of the attack, 16 medics were killed, and obviously this is against international norms and law. But in addition to that, the Israelis, in some cases, bombed buildings where entire families had been put, like, for example, the Samuni family. In other cases, they shot people assassination style, including children. And of course, they destroyed as much of the infrastructure as they could. And just to reiterate, for example, in the border area, one family I met after the attacks told me how they had survived the majority of the attacks. On the very last day, when the army was pulling out, they came to their house, which was roughly a few hundred meters from the border, and basically said, get out, and then 5 minutes later the house was leveled by dynamite. So this is obviously not because the family posed any sort of security threat to the heavily armed Israeli army. It's obviously part of their many policies of basically a creeping genocide on Gaza. One other thing to note in terms of the genocidal nature of the Israeli policies is that they even concocted a document of how many calories Palestinians needed to survive but not quite starve. It's called the Red Lines document. Gisha, Israeli human rights group, had it revealed, or whatever, had the administration, I can't think of the word, but anyway, reveal it. And it basically, yeah, they calculatedly decided what Palestinians could have to not quite starve. And then they halved it. So these are all genocidal policies meant to create, and it has created, immense suffering amongst the people in Gaza. And it's been going on for years. It's been going on at least since 2006 and longer. And I haven't even touched upon all the things. I know I don't have a whole lot of time, but Gaza is under also a manufactured electricity crisis. If they were allowed to have the industrial fuel, if Israel needed to run the power plant, if Israel allowed them to actually rebuild the power plant that Israel bombed in 2006, then Palestinians in Gaza would have adequate electricity, at least a lot more. They're at a 65% deficit right now. So this impacts on the individuals, it impacts on hospitals, universities, and it impacts on water, the ability to pump water to homes. It impacts on the ability to pump sewage into the sea, which they do because the Israelis won't allow the construction materials in to rebuild and expand the sewage holding pools. So I guess the prevailing message is that this is all manufactured, this is all preventable, with the exception of the aquifer, which is greatly over-extracted, and according to the UN, by 2016 it will be unusable any longer. That is not an easy fix, but the rest of it is. Open the borders, allow Palestinians to export, allow them to import the things they need, stop bombing them, stop terrorizing them, take the drones and F-16s out of the skies, allow Palestinian fishers to access all the 20 nautical miles of their fishing waters, and allow Palestinian farmers to work on the land without being terrorized and shot at and maimed and killed. Thank you. They killed 35,000 cattle in the war. They killed 1 million birds. Probably some rabbits.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Eva. Thank you for your commitment, and thank you for all your work. And thank you, Tristan, for being here. And I just want to take a moment to recognize your sacrifice and all that you've been through as a result of, you know, so many things, but just take a moment of silence for those that have been injured and or killed by U.S. weapons and tear gas specifically. Thank you. I think it's important to be grounded in this work and remember the impacts on the personal level. My name is Noura, Khouri, and I'm Palestinian, and Tristan's story speaks to me on a personal level in many ways. Before 2011, since 2003 or so, I've been a committed Palestine activist. I went to Palestine in 2003 for my first time with ISM and did nonviolent direct action against the occupation as well. And so I was also fired at with tear gas and rubber bullets, as are Palestinians every day, and people all over the world that are, you know, fighting injustice. So I'm here with representing War Resistors League, which is the oldest secular anti-war organization in the U.S., and the Facing Tear Gas campaign, which is a way that we connect all the struggles that are happening worldwide that are being suppressed through U.S. tear gas and weapons manufactured by U.S. corporations. This is a powerful representation of how, you know, all these interests converge, essentially. So I just want to read this quote by Obama in 2013, where he was speaking on Egypt and said at the UN General Assembly, said, the U.S. will at times work with governments that do not meet, at least in our view, the highest international expectations, but who work with us on our core interests. So what are these governments? These governments are military dictatorships in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Bahrain, in Palestine, and they are arming and funding and training all these dictatorships and police. And for me, I realized after 2011 and when the Egyptian revolution began that I can no longer just work and focus on Palestine. Everything is connected, and that is the main thing that I want to share with you today, that we need to really look at and understand these issues as part of a whole. And until we do, we're going to continue to chase our tails and go around in circles and get nowhere, essentially. These core interests that Obama was speaking of are very real interests for those that are in power. These are the elected officials that are supposed to be working in our interests, but as we all know, and largely why Occupy began in the first place, why we're here at the plaza, is because we get that. We know that these interests are not ours, and they're very clearly, you know, they can be seen as a triangle with the U.S. government working with the military contractors and the foreign governments, respectively. And how that breaks down is, you know, really important to understand so that we can start to attack it in real ways. So one of the reasons I like War Resistors League so much is because they're actually doing radical work on many fronts, and one of the main pillars of their work is tax resistance. So I really want to encourage you all to look at this organization and stop paying your taxes, at least for the war portion, which is about 50% of our budget at least. So that's one simple way that we can fight back, and we can get support through a network of legal and other advocates that are there and designed to help guide you through the process. You know, talk to me afterwards, or you can look up WRL.org to look at what some of these core interests are. So 50% of that budget, it breaks down in ways that are being felt very real in places like Turkey. Just this week rose up against tear gas being used and killed a young 12-year-old boy named Birkin Elvin. He is, you know, one of the latest victims of U.S. tear gas, and people abroad understand that the U.S. government, what they're doing, and they need our support. They need us to be resisting this very actively. Tear gas is one small example of how the repression comes down to our communities, but it affects people in prisons. They're using them in schools nowadays. I mean, this is poison. I mean, there's been examples of people being killed by inhaling too much of it in Egypt during the revolution and elsewhere. So it's called non-lethal, but it certainly is not non-lethal. And there are companies, there are ways to fight it. You know, any of you that are connected to the union, the unions, like longshoremen, we don't really know when these shipments are coming or where they're going or how they get out, but we can start building bridges and getting leaks from different various media and unions who do get this information, you know, sometimes at the last minute or sometimes it's not clear, but the more we look into it, the more likely we can find out, you know, where it's going and where it's coming, because I'm sure it goes out of the port of Oakland. And, you know, there's a reason that things like the DAC, the Domain Awareness Center, is targeting the port of Oakland. It's not because, you know, there have been previous terrorist attacks, quote unquote, on the port of Oakland. They realize that that is an important base that we have, where we have power to shut it down when those policies are working against us directly. DAC is a really powerful example, as is Urban Shield, of how these interests also converge. And for those of you that don't know, Urban Shield is a police training program where the federal government is arming the local government with $10+ million to bring to Oakland for a weekend of gun show, trade shows, and they're basically parading around all these huge weapons in the Marriott. Last year we did a protest that I helped organize, and this year we're going to need your support and help again. It's happening this year in the first week of September, so we don't have a lot of time, but we need to shut it down. These same military dictators come from Israel, come from Bahrain to train the OPD on these terrorist tactics that are used against the people of Oakland for simply exercising their democratic rights. So there are so many clear examples of how all these issues, come back. The same things we're doing abroad in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Bahrain, arming these dictators and just taking our core so-called interests as we please. So there are very real concrete ways that we can work together to fight them all, and I really encourage us all to work with organizations that understand that these linkages and are working directly and actively to combat them together. So thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting us, Gabby.
So we're here in front of Veolia, and they're an apartheid business. There's an international boycott against Veolia. People are protesting Veolia all over the world. And as our first speaker on Veolia, I want to introduce Paul Larudee, one of my personal heroes. Fuck Veolia! Or we have the other sound system too.
You just...
Mike.
Hello?
Yeah, it's in my pocket. Try this. I know how to work one of those.
I believe in you. You too can project.
I think the mic.
Let's try this.
Tristan? There we go. Okay. Did somebody say fuck Veolia?
I did.
Yeah. Well, you just gave my talk. I mean, what can I say? Yeah. But fuck Veolia is just an example, a small part of fuck the fascists. Fuck the 1%. You know, it's part of all of this. And one of the reasons we're here today to honor those who have been fallen or been damaged by Veolia and the others who profit off of blood and misery and repression is because those this is what our battle is, and all of you here are representative of that battle. You know, some of us, I mean, Tristan, where's Tristan? There he is. Okay, Tristan went to Palestine. Eva went to Palestine. Others of you have been to Palestine. But you don't have to go to Palestine to fight this. In fact, it's very possible that the battle for Palestine will be won here in the United States. And the reason it will be won here is because, ask yourself, if the United States decides that it wants Palestine to be free, guess what? What is Palestine going to be? Free! There you go. Now that's not very likely, not without us doing a lot of work, yes. But it can definitely happen, And it wouldn't be the first time that the people have made something happen. Let me tell you, I have a bit of hope. I mean, I'm 68 years old. I've been with this since 1965, you know? so it ain't happened yet. But I just got back from Washington a couple days ago. And in Washington, a whole new people got together. A whole new group of people got together to say Israel is not only fucking Palestinians and Lebanese and Syrians and Egyptians and Jordanians, Israel is fucking us here in the United States.
Yes.
They got together to say that. And who were these people? These people were high up, you're not going to believe this, in the CIA. There were about 3 or 4 former CIA people. Some of you know Ray McGovern, he was there. And there were people from the military, retired military, who said, you know, we're tired of these Israelis coming in and saying, we don't have to sign in, we don't have to show our passports, and we can have access to all the information we want whenever we want it. And we can take enriched uranium out of a company here in the United States and carry it on the plane over to Israel to make our own bomb. You know, I mean, this is the kind of thing that they were talking about there. And they're fed up. And they've gotten together. They're unifying. So what does this mean? This means that what we are doing here, what you are doing here, what all of us working in this movement to fight against fascism and domination, it's growing. It's growing, and it's going up into places we never imagined that it might go. So watch carefully. We are winning this fight. We are going to free Palestine, and we're going to free this country too. All right? Okay, let's do it.
And hey, so we have one more speaker. If the band can just hold with us. Thanks so much, band. BLO, Grass Liberation Orchestra. All right, Tova is going to come up and say some words as well. Let's hear it for Tova.
So in Boston, the Boston school bus drivers call them Violaya. Violaya. And today in San Francisco, so this is double hit against Veolia today. There was a demonstration in San Francisco today by the Boston school bus drivers at the San Francisco Veolia paratransit office in support of the Boston school bus drivers, 4 of whom are still fired from their resistance against Veolia earlier this year. So the thing is, this Boston school bus drivers union, they are political as hell, and they have been including demands against Palestine as part of their normal routine political agitation as part of their campaign. And the Jewish Voice for Peace there has been involved in supporting their campaign, and so have the Veterans for Peace and a number of other groups. But they are not hesitant and not afraid of having Palestinian signs and demands about the Palestinian struggle as part of their struggle fighting for their rights as workers. So I just wanted to say that this campaign against Veolia has broadened out into not only human rights but labor rights and support for Palestinian freedom and liberation. Thanks.
Thank you. Excellent. Aren't they good? Yeah. They're so good. Grass Liberation Orchestra. And thank you again for everyone for sticking with us this whole time. We're here at this place with many great people, most of them dead, maybe all of them dead even. I just feel like I really love these statues, and I feel like there's something very grounding about it, and that it connects us to our history, to our future, and our past, and our present, and that we need all of it. That is a horrible noise. You think I'm doing that? Something. Oh, the bullhorn. Maybe. Anyway, I want it. Nice. So I want to talk a little bit about Tristan. Tristan and I made a trip to Palestine together in the winter of 2009. Do you want to come up here with me, Tristan? We went to Palestine together in the winter of 2009 because I believed then, as I believe now, that Jewish anarchists like me have a real responsibility to Palestinian people who are struggling for freedom, and that we have a real responsibility to the struggle for a free Palestine within our lifetimes, you know, making it real, making it happen, making it now. You know, most people who get shot in the head by the Israeli military are Palestinian, and we know this. And most people who go to be international solidarity activists in Palestine don't end up getting shot in the head. But sometimes terrible things happen to you, and terrible things did happen to Tristan. I was with Tristan when he was shot. We were at the very tail end of a demonstration in a town called Nailin. It was demonstrating in defense of their land and against the building of the apartheid so-called separation wall. At the time, it was only a fence. People were really resisting it every step of the way. You know, they tried to put the fence in, and people resisted every single step of the way. People resisted, and they're still resisting now. It was the end of the demonstration. Many people had already gone home. We were kind of the last of the stragglers, and really, very much out of nowhere. Not in the heat of battle, not in really the heat of any kind of moment. Tristan was shot in the face, and we really kind of still don't fucking know why. You know, I don't know. But he was shot in the face, and they shot him in the face and kept shooting. It was in an American-made Teargas grenade, made in Pennsylvania. It's called in Palestine they call it the Saruch. It's got an extra propellant mechanism, so it's meant to shoot super fast, super far, and hit with enough force to break through barricades. It's supposed to shoot 300 to 400 meters, and Tristan was shot in the face from about 50 meters. He fell, and they continued shooting at us and continued gassing us. Palestinian medics, Red Crescent medics, came right away and were under fire with us and very courageously helped us evacuate Tristan. We had to, you know, we carried him to a paved area where there was a road. There's a picture of Akil Sur. Where is he? It's right there. Can somebody bring me that picture? Yeah, can you bring it over here, please? This is Akil Sur. He was killed. Akil helped us carry Tristan into the ambulance and risked his own life to help us carry Tristan into the ambulance after Tristan had been shot. And then he himself was killed
several months later at another demonstration. All of the people in these pictures have been either killed, mostly killed, and a couple of people very seriously wounded, like Tristan, but mostly killed in different parts of the world by tear gas that we make here in the United States and that we send to Egypt and to Palestine and to Turkey and to Bahrain and all over the place. But Tristan was shot and taken in a total of 3 ambulances. The first being a Palestinian ambulance that was stopped and held at a military checkpoint. And we were held at a military checkpoint, which is what happens in Palestine when you get hurt. And we were stopped and held at a military checkpoint for about 15 minutes and abused. We had a soldier who was there fucking with us and abusing us. And others who were just didn't want to be there. They were like teenage conscripts and they kind of zombied out and didn't want to be there, but there they were, and they were the ones doing it to us. We were then transferred eventually to an Israeli ambulance, and because we're white foreigners, we got to go to the white people hospital in Israel, which doesn't mean that it's all white people in the hospital, but it's a white people hospital in Israel. You know, if, where's the pictures of Bassem? Hey, could you come over here, please? I want to show you these pictures, too. So we got to go to Tel HaShomer Hospital, which is an excellent trauma facility in a suburb of Tel Aviv. And we stayed there, by the way, for 15 months, for a total of 15 months. Partly because Tristan was in very bad shape, and partly also because he didn't have health insurance in the United States. And the reality is that he got better care in the white people hospital in Israel than he would have gotten in the United States. These are pictures of Bassem Abu Rahma. He was killed very shortly after Tristan in a town very nearby called Elaine. Shot with the same weapon, again made in Pennsylvania by CSI, Combined Systems Incorporated. And Bassem was shot in the chest from even closer range and killed right away. He was killed during a protest. I can, all of these pictures, all of these people, they all have stories right there. That's Ahmet Atakan, who was killed in Turkey. You know, this woman here, Lubna Alami, also killed. And no, she survived actually. She survived, but is in very bad shape. Mustafa Tamimi. We have a picture of Mustafa Tamimi. Jawahir Abu Rahma right there. That's Bassem's sister, and she was killed as well. She died as a result of being heavily tear gassed, and she asphyxiated and died. It's hard to know exactly where I'm going talking about this. March 13th happens every year. I used to sort of feel like, oh, the sky is falling. It's March 13th. Terrible things should be happening to me right now, and it's not. It's another day. It's just another day. But we do try to come together in a positive way, in a good way, and try to love each other and cherish each other and not fight over stupid bullshit like we do all the time in Oakland in the political scene. And to hopefully try to be all in it together, and to take some time to honor all of these people and to honor, including Tristan, and to honor Tristan, who was shot in the head and had a lot of his brain removed. I mean, this shit is real. This is real. This is what happened, and we gotta just do what we can. We gotta just do what we can together. Tristan, I know I'm really putting you on the spot. Do you want to talk a little bit about being in a wheelchair, or talk a little bit about anything?
Yeah. Who's this right here?
Oh, I know. You found a home. Thank you so much. What's your name?
Brock. My name is Brock.
Hi, Brock. Thanks so much for introducing yourself.
It's not Barack Obama. It's BROC. No
Tristan, do you want to talk a little bit about Okay, well maybe you can thank everyone for coming. And what I'm hoping too is after Tristan thanks everyone that we can take some of these pictures and that we can add them to this area here where they belong.
Does Tristan have some words of encouragement?
So do you want to just thank people for coming, please? No.
All right, well I'm doing it then. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you so much. And yeah, and go ahead and put these up anywhere that you like, anywhere that feels good.
Thank you, Chris.
Love you guys.